Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast, brought to you by Renthal Street. And on today's podcast, we're going to be looking back at the Portuguese Round the World SBK. Myself, Steve English, Gordon Ritchie, and Ivo Schützbach from Speedweek.com on the podcast as ever. And for a very rare occasion, we're going to be on YouTube as well. Neil's going to be taking care of that to make sure that we're out there. And Gordo, me and you probably got the memo a little bit too late. We haven't shaved.
I know.
Ivo, you're looking spectacular.
As always.
He's even shown us a bit of cleavage as well, which we could do without, frankly. But never mind.
We're the ones with the ample cleavage, Gordo. But the one thing for this week, obviously, we're going to be pretty busy on this show because we've got a lot to get through in a short space of time. And Ivo, you're the busiest man in the world, I think, at times. And you're covering MotoGP and World Superbikes. For Speed Week, we saw obviously the big news in MotoGP. We've covered it on the podcast. Marcmarquez and running off the grid and all the fiasco for the start. It was quite good to have a change of pace with World SBK just giving us that Toprak Bulega battle because Portimao delivered in all three races.
Look, we create the big headlines with some proper sport. You know, that's the difference.
It is true. And it's one of those things, Gordo, that for us at the weekend, we had Peter Baum in the media centre as well. Peter was working in Portimao. We'll see him in Assen again. And I know you spoke to Peter a few times. I spoke to Peter quite a bit through the course of the weekend. He just loved the fact that he could come to World Superbikes. For one thing, garages were open to him. People would answer his question. We had great racing. And in the media centre, everyone wanted to just talk racing. There was no bullshit talk about politics in the sport or this, that, the other. It was just about the racing. And I thought, I'm sure when you chatted to Peter, it was the same.
Well, me and Peter did go into quite a lot of politics about the sport as well, but about the sport. So yes, it was all about racing. Yeah, I wasted, although there is no such thing as wasted, too much time speaking to Peter on the weekend because he's a really interesting person. He understands so many aspects of things at a very deep level that we maybe understand to our level, but he is an active engineer in the sport and also an incredibly interested journalist as well. He's got many strings to his bow, and he's a guy that's worth listening to for all those things. But yeah, no, I think everybody that comes to Superbike from MotoGP or anywhere else, every time they come, they can't believe how open it is. They can't believe how, they're trying to clamp down on us a little bit and control who we speak to when and all that. Yeah, okay, I kind of play the game sometimes, but most of the time we just go and do it. And that's refreshing for people because, unfortunately, partly because of the scale and because of the number of people that would want to speak to the riders and the teams all the time in MotoGP, it's a lot more controlled there. So we're a lot more open, and I think also, as a championship, philosophically, we've always been more open. That's the point. I hate it when you see the teams like putting barriers behind the bikes, not letting you see what they're working on. I'm sorry about that. This is production racing, and we've all got the same kit as each other now. The one manufacturer's making stuff for everybody up and down the pit lane. So why are we hiding anything away from anybody? We should have completely open garages as far as I'm concerned.
I always think it's quite interesting when you think that as well, Gordo, because the reason that we're able to do our jobs well is because we're able to talk to everyone and kind of remove the bullshit factor. And Ivo, I think you found that at the weekend whenever we spoke about it on our Paddock Note show for our patrons on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. On Thursday, whenever there was the Toprak to Honda MotoGP story. And, it's very simple. You just go down and you speak to Toprak and Toprak tells you what the story is. And you found that last Thursday and we obviously talked about it the other day, so we'll keep it a little bit brief now. But Toprak basically laughed at it straight away and just dismissed it.
Yeah, he really had a laugh with Gordo and me and said, look, nothing is signed. Everything is open for next year. But, whenever there is some smoke, most of the time there's also a little bit of fire. So when I came back from Portimao, I was contacting his manager, Kenan Sofuoglu, who is a 5-time world champion also in Supersport. And Kenan confirmed more or less what Toprak said. So he said he will start the negotiations in Assen. But I don't believe him 100%. I'm pretty sure that he's already talking to people, listening to some ideas and opinions. And so the question was obviously, will Toprak be in MotoGP or Superbike? And he said the political absolute correct answer, the chance is 50-50. So he said all and nothing. Yeah, I think it's still too early. BMW will do everything to keep the star. Kenan will check out if there is a possibility in MotoGP, and a possibility means a bike and a team where Toprak could be able to have success. Without these, I don't think he will go to MotoGP and riding for 10th or 15th places.
Immediately as well. I mean, from the beginning, you know, get a lot of testing in and at least have the same chance as everybody in his first year, because that's the missing link for any rider coming from Superbike to MotoGP. Whether that's realistic for them to have an ambition of or not, we'll probably find out, because Keena's the best one. Toprak's the best one to go there of all the crop of people that are there now, even though he's not a kid.
Yeah,
and I think there was a very interesting solution. Could be the story that he will be in the Superbike Honda factory team next year, and then making the jump to GP. If HRC is able to offer him a 3-year contract, why not? Why not?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be an interesting one. Honda is improving in both paddocks. We can see clearly step forwards. Maybe Toprak is the missing link to have success on the Honda Superbike. I mean, nobody expected that he's so successful on the BMW, and he showed us everything since beginning of last year. Why not on a Honda? And if you see what Johan Zarco, for example, did, or Luca Marini in the last race, who was top 10 in the GP, I don't think that Toprak is less talented. The question is, will he have enough time? Is he able to adapt very soon? Because they have very, very limited days of testing in MotoGP, so it's quite difficult when you are new in the class.
Yeah, I always think that the biggest factor is that Toprak wants to be a history maker, and he wants to win. Where Honda are right now in World Superbikes is very similar to where BMW were whenever he signed for them. I think that's the big interesting thing for him. We know that the package is good enough, and we know that if you put Toprak on the bike, he can make a big difference to it as well. You put Phil Marin in there with him, and I think that there's no doubt that he can win with that package. For moving to MotoGP is a different story. I think for Razgatlioglu, Honda's an option because he can dictate terms with them. If your choice is between Luca Marini and Toprak Razgatlioglu, Toprak's a better rider than Luca. He's got a much more proven track record. And Marini hasn't really done that much in the Premier class. So compared to Zarco, a MotoGP race winner, a guy that we know will always be up there as one of the top 10, 11, 12 riders on the grid, and Joan Mir, a world champion in the class, you know, there's a difference between putting Toprak in place of one of those guys. But for Marini, is there a big difference? Is there a big risk for a guy that scored a handful of points last year, has, you know, good relations with the media, he's very smart, he's very intelligent, but put him on the LCR bike and put Toprak on the factory bike? And I think that could be something that makes sense. But we'll wait and see how it all transpires over the course of the summer, because we've got a lot to get through for what we saw on track from Toprak this weekend. And the battle, Evo, between him and Niccolo Bulega, it just showed again the steps that Bulega's made.
I mean, if I'm not wrong, this was really the first time that these two giants of the actual Superbike World Championship battled elbow to elbow. Normally Bulega wins a race, he wins the start and is gone. And normally when Toprak is overtaking a guy and is leading the race, there is not much chance to strike back, as long as you're not on the level of, let's say, Bautista in his best times. Yeah. We saw great battles with Toprak. Jonathan in his best times, great battles. And now it looks more and more that Niccolo made this step and is now on a quite similar level.
It's interesting you say that, because I was in the airport with Phil Marin on Sunday after the race. Phil's flight was delayed, and we had a few hours in the airport just chatting there as we're watching the MotoGP race. And it's always interesting to watch any race with a rider or a crew chief or just a really good watcher of the sport. And Phil was watching the GP, and you're just chatting about different things here and there. And he mentioned Estoril last year. That was the race where we saw Bulega win the battle to the line with Razgatlioglu. And Phil said that at the time, he said to Toprak, "Whoa, I'll tell you what, Bulega is the coming man, and he's getting the perfect education in World Superbikes because he's battling with you." And we saw that at the weekend, that even though Toprak came out ahead of all three races, the fact that Bulega tried to overtake him gave me a lot of encouragement, because he wasn't always waiting for the start-finish straight. We saw it up at turn 13 and 14 at the end of the lap, where they traded places a few laps in a row. And I thought it was really encouraging to see him do it there, because he was trying things against Razgatlioglu. Because for the team back in the garage, Gordo, they need to see a rider that's adapting to the circumstances around him. And Bulega did that at the weekend.
Yes, he did. And I think it was, I asked him what the real difference was between the two of them on track, because obviously Toprak seemed to be able to hold a tighter line and go in a tighter line and defend in a few places that otherwise Bulega might have had more of a chance to go through on. And Bulega, being the kind of big cool guy he is, he just said, "No, I think it's more just the riding style. He does this, I do that. He's got an advantage there, I've got an advantage there." But the way he was talking, and also Toprak to a slightly lesser degree, but the same idea, is that it's more about them than the bikes, which is encouraging, because it means we know that the Ducati can take on and beat the BMW or everything else toe to toe. But now they've got somebody on it again who's still learning it, which means there's still more potential. What was the only thing that was wrong with last year as a spectacle as anything else? Toprak ran away with it. And until his horrible injury in France, which could have been much worse, he deservedly won the championship. So good, big gold stars for everybody involved. But when you actually dug one level down from, wow, BMW won the championship and Toprak won in a BMW, below that was, by miles from everybody else. So what we need is, even if it's only two riders, we need those two battering elbows off each other all year, because we know there's going to be lots of fights behind. But in any championship, when one rider's just running away with it without any drama or anything happening, it's not great entertainment for the masses. You need fights for the win in any championship for it to be truly interesting to the non-specialist.
It was in Portimao, it was the first time that we really heard from Toprak that he has deep, deep respect for Bulega. I mean, he has always respect for all riders, but he's also all the time mentioning how good the Ducati is. He tells us every week that everyone in the world knows that Ducati is by far the best. So this means also that BMW is also winning because of him, what is true. And in Portimao, he said, look, it's not only the Ducati, because we have many Ducatis on the grid, when only one guy is fighting against me, and Niccolo. And Toprak realized this. And all the guys in BMW said to me before the race, okay, this is a Toprak track. We will have success here. And they were expecting to have success. And then they realized that they have nothing more in hand. Toprak was just winning by 1/10 of a second. And he was not far away from Bulega. Bulega was directly on his back wheel for the whole race. And this is some promising stuff for the upcoming races.
Yeah, I think that, Gordon, just what we saw at the weekend was the real proof of the fact that Bulega is a step above the other Ducati riders. Just like you said, Ivo, from Toprak's perspective as well. We saw the Ducati struggled at the weekend. Batista qualified down the field. Redding was nowhere. Iannone had a really tough weekend. Whatever you want to look at, the only metric for a good weekend for Ducati came from Bulega. And Gordo, similar to what we had seen in the past from Toprak.
Yes, I mean, Toprak can make the difference on almost anything, as we've joked about in the past. But I mean, the guy could win on a unicycle. He's that good. But I think that the most telling thing was, and I'm probably paraphrasing a little bit here, when he was asked about, you had things in the pocket. It might even have been Evo asked the question that you had something in your pocket here, BMW, and you thought you had something more in the pocket here. And Toprak said, here this weekend I had to empty the pocket. So I think whatever he had in his pocket, he had to take it all out and put it on the table. He had to play every hand of poker this weekend. And I think that's a telling thing. It's such a strong track for Toprak.
Imagine telling Evo and Gordo that he had to empty his pockets. Like, it must have been... You've never seen something like that where you're from, boys.
There's never anything in my pockets. And Evo pretends he's not got anything in his pockets either.
Not me. My pockets are absolutely empty.
There's lint in mine, that's about it. But just when you look at the weekend, we mentioned there about the qualifying woes Ducati had. Switching on that tyre in the Super Bowl session seemed to be very difficult for them. We had the harder compounds this weekend. I know you don't like to speak about tyres, Evo, but is the qualifying performances we saw from Ducati, is that something that we can expect to see again? Or do you think was this just those set of circumstances in Portimao?
I think it was more about the circumstances.
Okay, then we don't need to talk about tyres ever again.
Whenever Pirelli is changing tires, and if we have only the hard ones, then we see different results to normally. I think in Aston we go back to normal.
Yeah. Gordo, just as a quick note as well, I know you had a really good interview with Giorgio Barbia from Pirelli, and I think David's going to do a little Patreon show with you just about that, because lots of details covered, whether it was MotoGP or Superbikes.
Yes, it was a good opportunity for us in the Superbike paddock to speak to Giorgio about what might change for us. Because obviously taking on MotoGP is a very... It's not a particularly big thing. I know that sounds stupid, but let me explain. It's actually a very different thing. They now seem confident that they'll be able to use the technology that they have in Superbike and adapt it for sizes, for all the other things that are required for, let's not forget, will be a slightly less powerful MotoGP scene in the long term. The question last year when I spoke to Giorgio was maybe it's too much of a change. Maybe we're going to have to bring in all these exotic materials to handle MotoGP, etc. That seems to have been a real change in the idea of what their technology can be and will be towards running MotoGP, which means that it will still be, it might even be a better thing for World Superbike, because we might get even better tyres, because they're going to find greater extremes to deal with when they do run MotoGP. So they accelerate. I think. At the end of the day, I only work in World Superbike. That's it. That's where I spend my professional lifetime. I don't do MotoGP. I don't do nationals. I don't do almost anything else. So that's always going to be my focus. But we hear enough about MotoGP. So what it might mean for World Superbike is either no change, possibly some change. We keep talking about going slower. That people we need to go a bit slower. Well, I don't know if we do, because everybody's still talking about racing 1000cc superbikes, as far as I can see, as the flagship class. No one wants to change that. No one I've spoke to, and whether it's Pirelli or anybody else, is even remotely interested in it. So we're still going to be running on high performance big tyres for as long as I can see. Evo's going to say something about tyres voluntarily. I'm want to listen to
I
this.
think he's saying something about the changing for the classes.
Yeah, we'll not say one more word about tires.
Good.
But a confirmation is what you said, Gordo, about the future speed. Gordo, me, and a handful of other journalists had the chance last weekend to talk to Greg Lavilla, who is the executive officer from World Superbike. And we asked him this question. We said, look, the idea is to make MotoGP slower. What does it mean for us? And he looked with big eyes, and in reality, he said, I don't care. I don't care. He is doing what the manufacturers wants to have in World Superbike. And he also said the only thing is we only can be so fast that the racetracks are still safe. But this has nothing to do with lap times in MotoGP.
Yeah, I thought one thing that was interesting, speaking to Lavia over the winter, he said the only manufacturer that's come up to him and said, we need to make a change from these regulations is the only manufacturer that doesn't have a 1000cc bike on the grid. Aprilia, with their 1100cc bike. And I know within the FIM and within World Superbikes, the feeling was, why is the one manufacturer that's building an 1100cc bike trying to dictate terms for what we should do? And there was clear frustration about Aprilia for this. It was also interesting, Evo, that a couple of weeks ago, we heard from the one manufacturer that has an injured rider. in MotoGP, also saying that, oh, when a rider returns from injury, he should be able to test a MotoGP bike just to make sure that he's safe on a MotoGP bike. So the wants of Aprilia seem to be dictated by what they have available to them, which is similar to a lot of other manufacturers, obviously. But they're the ones that are making the loudest noises about a lot of things. And I don't think that there's any incentive to bring Aprilia to the table in World Superbikes unless they have a bike that fits the regulations.
Can I interject here? I don't see any problem because we've always done this in World Superbike. Is if somebody starts making an 1100, then you find a way of bringing them in. So throttle control, torque limit, spec electronic just for them. If they want to come and race an 1100 before, great. I'm quite happy with that because we've raced 750s against thousands. We've all through history we've done it. So there's not, and given that the next generation thing is vast difference between 600s and nearly 1000cc bikes, and it works fine, more or less fine, and better every year. Why don't we allow in Aprilia but with an 1100? But remember, Ducati built a 1000 when their V4 road bike range is all 1100s and maybe even 1200s now. Their other sports bikes, Panigale sports bikes, are 1100s as far as I remember. They built the V4R specially to take on World Superbike and also to allow them to benefit from the like-for-like CC of their MotoGP programme. So they built the 1100 for the road bike so that it looks good on road test figures and the torque's higher and it's maybe a more livable bike, even though all these things are unrideable without for the average road rider without electronics. So if Aprilia want to race 1100, I don't see the reason why we couldn't, but they're going to have to come and present a thing to everybody saying, okay, we'll race 1100s, but we don't want you to change anything.
Yeah. By the way, they are racing in endurance.
Yeah.
With this 1100 bike. And why? Because they are interested and because they asked the promoter, they asked the FIM, and they said, okay, we will find a way. And they found a way. And exactly the same would happen in Superbike. So no excuses.
Yeah, just to move it on as well to one of the other big topics from the weekend, we'll talk about Yamaha a little bit because it was a really interesting weekend for Yamaha. We saw Andrea Locatelli on the podium. We saw Locke on the second row of the grid, top five all the way through the weekend. Really impressive from Locke. And then on the other side of his Yamaha pit box, we had Jason O'Halloran in places as Jonathan Ray's injury replacement. And we had Johnny on Sunday give us an update on his condition. But Gordo, I'll give you the good of Yamaha and Locke's weekend. It was great to see him back up there.
Yes, and when you looked at when he came in after the race and he walked through the pit lane, he has still had his 1000-yard stare race pace on. And before we went and had a proper talk with him in the media scrum, I kind of went up and congratulated him and Ollie, his PR guy, because that's an unexpected result, given how strong the Ducatis and Toprak have been at the beginning of the year. There's a lot of Ducatis to fight your way through before you get on a podium in any race this year. And Portimao's nothing special racetrack for that. There's it's a huge straight, so it should get outgunned all the time by the Ducatis on the straight. So two things to bear in mind. One, they had a slightly different chassis. They wouldn't tell us what, but it's obviously softer, therefore more feel. Therefore, the rider feels more confident. He can push more. And of all the tracks in the calendar, even though there's lots of slow air corners, you need 1,000,000% confidence at Portimao because every corner's blind, every corner's tricky, every corner leads into another one which is equally tricky. The wee man genuinely was on it that race. His face when he came in, he literally said to me, "It's best the maximum we could do, nothing more." He was still out on the track with superhuman levels of concentration, and I think genuinely that result was as much ability of pure concentration to not make a mistake. And he kind of went on and said that he never, he was just his best locker. And look at what he did. I mean, I think that's an amazing result. For by other people having trouble or setup or whatever, there's no way he should be beating, all of the Ducatis except one. No way. Shouldn't happen.
And Evo, just to move to the other side of the pit box, Jonathan Ray, we sat down with him. We have that on Patreon as well, patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. We had Johnny's debrief, and Johnny was quite interested, speaking about the fact that he had to get off the painkillers because it was tough for him mentally. He was going down a dark hole, so he got rid of them, and it seems that he's in a pretty good place now to get himself back on the bike. The goal seems to be Cremona, and by that time you've missed the first quarter of the season, but still comes back, and we'll see how he does over the summer. But at least for him, there's some signs that he should be back on a bike soon.
Yeah, I mean, for us, when we heard all the news and when we got more detailed information about his injuries, for us it was very clear that Cremona would be the first possibility. And Jonathan kept it a little bit open and said, no, first I need to talk to my surgeon and blah, blah, blah. In the end, he said, look, it would be silly to come back too early because he did it in the past and there's no reason for it because he's not fighting for the title. So it was more or less clear that he's targeting now the Cremona race. He also said he would like to come back fully fit. And I have big doubts that in 4 weeks he will be fully fit because actually he's not even allowed to bring some weight on his foot. And he showed us the X-rays from his foot. Doesn't look so nice. Yeah.
I agree, Ivo. I agree about the prospect of even Cremona might be too difficult. Most is another week, another free weekend, and then Most. Maybe that's more realistic. But if he's talking about coming back fit, he's talking about coming back at Mazzano or Donington. If he's 100% fit, given what he said, the timescale of what all the doctors have said to him, then you're talking about not either of those races.
The reason for that as well, Most is a very physical track. You've got all those big changes of direction. It's a tough one to come back for. I think for Ray, it depends on what he views as being full fitness. Is it that thing of being able to just get back on your bike, or how's he actually going to judge it? He had his meeting with his consultants this week, and you'd imagine on the basis of what he said to us on Sunday that he's back weight bearing on his foot now, so should be able to do a little bit more with his training. But until we see Johnny on a motocross bike to try and get himself fit, then it's hard to see him jumping onto a superbike.
And I think, I'm sure most people that follow racing closely understand, but there will be people who don't follow it quite as closely. You steer these bikes with everything. You're not pushing on the handlebar and leaning over. You're having to push with your feet really hard. You're having to move your feet around the foot peg to maneuver the bike. You have to push with exactly the part of the foot that is broken and has got 3 titanium plates riding across the top 3. It's like his foot's in 2 halves, more or less, without these plates on it. And now, motorcycle racing is very physical and it's very aerobic, but you use your feet a lot to push the bike around. So unless he can find a way of doing that, not exactly on the spot where his fracture is, he's full fitness is a long way away for Jonathan. But if he's up to it, and don't forget, Johnny's come back from some horrendous injuries many times, as have many other motorbike racers, and he will be coming back before the doctors want him to, as long as he feels he's fit and as long as he's allowed to. So we might see him before. I'm not saying he won't be there, but I'm saying if you take what he said about recovery cycles, we're talking longer than the next 2 rounds. Ivo, sorry.
God, don't forget, the titanium plates and the screws, they are just fixing the bigger fractures in his foot.
Yes.
And we know he has also broken little bones, and they need to heal on a natural way. Natural way means time. So, and if he says in one sentence, when I come back, I will be 100% fit, then this means, okay, he needs more time. Then Cremona is too early. But in the next sentence, he said, if I would fight for the championship, I would be on the bike in Portimao. Okay, this is the racer.
Yeah.
The guy.
It's the difference between being hurt and being injured, and when you can come back. And I thought that for Johnny, we'll wait and see when he gets back on the bike. But I think everyone's excited to see how he'll do once he is back on the bike. But we've looked at the good, the battle for the race victory, Lock on the podium, the bad, Johnny sitting on the sideline. And Ivo, you can get all excited now about the ugly. And the ugly was Bautista and Redding on Saturday. Because this little tit for tat that the two boys had, it was pretty entertaining. I thought Scott Redding saying basically, I want to like Alvaro, but fuck, he makes it hard.
Nice. I think his original quote was, I want to like Alvaro, but he makes me hate him more every day.
Yeah.
And the only problem for us was that we didn't have any proper footage from the TV camera, so we could not control what really happens. Normally, when you see the moving pictures, then at least you can have an opinion. Our problem was we didn't see nothing. We had some onboard pictures from Alvaro and not much more. And then we had the quotes from Alvaro and we had the quotes from Scott, and it was more or less the opposite from each other.
Yeah.
And the biggest surprise for me was that Scott was super quiet. For 10 minutes, he was very polite and defensive, and then he thought, okay, fuck off.
I have to say, from my perspective of everything that we saw, without taking into account what both riders said, Scott's account seemed much more likely than Alvaro's account. And Bautista, he's done it in the past where he hasn't shown that respect that there's other people on the racetrack. And this instant seemed like that. And then from the views that we've seen, it does look like Alvaro he's taken his line regardless of who's there. And it was completely unnecessary for him to do that. He was going to come past Remy and he was going to come past Scott anyway. So he didn't need to do it the way he did it. And by sweeping across the front of them, he put himself in a position where there could be a crash. And Alvaro can say, people in the midfield, they never think about the consequences. He doesn't think about the consequences. And he was the architect of his own downfall for me. And on the basis of what we've seen, the replay from on board with Alvaro shows that Scott was in front of him coming into turn 3 and on the way out. Fair enough, Alvaro has a better exit from the corner. But Scott doesn't just disappear. And in Alvaro's mind, it looks like Scott did disappear. And this is where, for me, I'll side it as a racing incident, but Alvaro was the one that had everything to lose, and he lost it. And suddenly he falls after this weekend. He's 4th in the World Championship. He's 50-odd points, 52 points down on the championship leader. You know, he's not making that up on Bulega or Toprak because he's not consistent enough. He doesn't qualify well enough. And when you don't qualify well, you create these situations. Gordo, what about you? What was your thinking?
Oh, sorry. I didn't realise you were asking me. I think until we get a clear view of it, which we didn't get, and we did think we'd seen it, the action, and then we realised that it wasn't that particular corner or that incident. Until you can actually see it, I can't judge who. Yeah. What I do like is the fact that we've got two people who are itching for the chance to have a pop at each other because of previous things. Don't underestimate the human element of motorbike racing and how compelling it can be off track. And there's a bit of previous there.
Yeah.
You know? But ultimately, we need a bit of that spice. It's all right being nice and respecting the rivals and a good clean fight and all that. Great. I don't want to see a dirty fight. I want to see clean racing because it's too serious not to have. But when it goes wrong, I'm quite happy for the riders in opposition to have a pop at each other because it makes people more interested, you know. We need it. All sports need it. All sports need a bit of needle, as long as it doesn't go too far. And especially motorbike racing where it's such a dangerous thing, it needs to only go so far. But if this adds a bit more spice to the next battle on track and the next press conference off track, and another thing for the fans to key into, bring it on. Bring it on. But the incident itself, I don't really want to get involved if I never really saw the whole thing and can give a judgment. I don't want to give a judgment on something that I can't judge. Does that make sense?
Just to move on something we can judge, Gordo. Chan Onchu in Supersport. Because Onchu's had the most horrendous time over the last few years. The Indonesia victory in Supersport a few years ago was followed immediately by being taken out by Yari Montala at Assen. A very serious injury for Onchu. And basically one of his arms, the growth in it just disappeared because he couldn't train. He had no strength in one arm. He was riding with effectively one arm on the bars. Correct. And really tough times for him. To win at the weekend from pole position, to put together a weekend like that, obviously he crashed in race 2 as well, so you've got that up and down nature of Onchu. But switching to the R9 seems like it's really just reinvigorated his career. He's with a good team, with the Evan Brothers team. Fabio always puts together a really good operation. And Öncü looks so much more mature now. He's got perspective. When he came in at the end of the race on Saturday, he was actually able to just be natural about how happy he was to win again, because it's been a tough time for him.
It's a very complicated situation, so I'll keep it short. He's still, most of his career so far, he's been a kid. Now, he's lucky to have people around him, all the Turkish riders, and Kenan looking after him in that kind of military way, do this, don't do that, They're all part of the same group. And he's a totally different character from all the rest of the Turkish guys, which is they're all complete individuals as well, which makes life very interesting. But he's been through the mill as a teenager. He's had factory level expectation as a teenager on not the best bike in the grid, the design, the CC, everything during the next generation times. Still won a race in Mandalika. He's got loads of podiums, and nobody, all the Yamaha teams that I spoke to after testing in Australia at the test before the season were all a bit not sure about the R9. It wasn't quite ready yet, even though they'd spent a lot of time working on it. And look at what happened as soon as the races started. Oh, it is ready. And it did win a race. And then Öncü did the same. I would say there's still a lingering thing about Öncü because he didn't need to crash while leading. I understand that maybe the bike wasn't running as well and wasn't stopping as well as it was in the first race. But so, yes, maturity absolutely for winning the race. But if another rider would maybe have, if he had his time again, he'd probably go, okay, I'll knock a couple of tenths off here and see where I go, instead of pushing to try and maintain the lead with some proper talents and proper variety of bikes on his tail. So yeah, I think incredibly positive. Nobody saw him winning that race that early in the year. He's made an incredible recovery. And I mean, this is a guy who not that long ago was literally having to lift his arm onto the table while still racing the motorbike. So once he got set with the handlebars, his fingers and stuff could go, but the muscle in his arm was just gone. So he was performing minor miracles. He's come back. He's obviously repaired, not completely, but a lot more. No, I've got nothing but respect and admiration for him. And he's still very young. But he raced all those years as a teenager with all that going on, having to fight back as a teenager, as a kid.
Yeah, he's only 21 now, and youngest ever Grand Prix winner. You look back 7 years ago, everyone thought he was going to be this absolute superstar, and it's never really played in for him. But certainly the win at the weekend was a big moment for him. But even when you look at the supersport class in general, everyone still talks about Manzi, and there's that need to put him on a superbike next year. He's had a superbike test for Yamaha, and apparently it didn't go very well. But for Manzi, he never tests well. He never practices well. He rarely qualified well for much of his career. But once you put him into a race situation, he's just fantastic. And we saw that again at the weekend, where he came away with 2 second-place finishes. So his season so far has been a win at the opening race of the year and then 3 second-place finishes in the last 3 races. He's leading the World Championship. He's strong. He's consistent. I don't understand how he's still in the supersport class. I'd have him on a factory bike in an instant. And in all fairness, I'd probably put him on Bautista's factory Ducati. And Ducati's then got their young Italian rider to pair up with Bulega as well. It's a really strong lineup. But for Manzi, what's your thoughts?
I think apart from his lack of interest in testing and from his not perfect performances in the qualifying, I totally agree to you. He's a perfect racer. He developed so much in the last couple of years since he left the Moto2 paddock, and since he is working with 10K. Even before, when he was on the Triumph, he showed some quite impressive stuff. And as I said, for me, Manzi, he is the upcoming guy. He had already last year. If he would have won the Supersport World Championship, he would be on a Superbike this year. I'm pretty sure he has something similar in his contract for next year. The question will be, if he wins, is the Yamaha the first choice for him? Because we have many more possibilities next year. And if you are the outstanding rider in Supersport and you can choose between different manufacturers, maybe Yamaha will not be first choice.
What about in the class as well? Bo Schneider picking up his first race victory in Supersport for MV in race 2. Bo's done a really good job since he jumped onto that bike at Estoril last year. We've seen him for 4 rounds. So far this season, he's been in the top 5 for every race. He's got 3 podiums. Good starts this season for him. Him against Manzi looks like such a good battle in that class.
And he should have won in Australia both races. Talking about pure speed. Normally, he should be the leader of the World Championship, but for a couple of reasons, it didn't go well in Australia. And now he's back, and I'm pretty sure this gives him massive confidence. And now the next race, which is coming, is his home race in Holland.
Yeah.
We will see some impressive stuff in Assen.
Yeah. And I think the best thing about it is now we are manoeuvring things to the point whereby there really is a top-class rider for most manufacturers. And even when you look at the for example, Jeremy Alcoba, I think he's overperforming, the bike's overperforming, the package is overperforming from what we thought a single Kawasaki in the whole championship would do. But that's just one example. You look at the Triumph with Tom Booth Amos on it. He's obviously reaching that level of riding maturity and ability at the same time as the bike's a little bit better. The small changes in the background of the rules, one change in the rear swing arm link to make it more linear, has had a massive effect already. It instantly changed the results. All the way through that class, when you're looking at the bikes and the riders, you're thinking, well, they're there. They're all there. And where were the Ducatis at the weekend? Really, the normal massive Ducatis, it took a while in, I think, race 2 to get to one Ducati over the line. This is really good for the championship because it was turning into the same idea. Well, Ducatis are going to be the only bike to be on in that class. Well, it shows you when you get the right rider on the other bikes, they're all pretty capable as well. Sorry, Ivo?
I mean, there's the only problem with the rules is for me that in the last 2 years, Ducati was winning the championship. And so a lot of teams and riders said, okay, this will be the bike for the future. This is the reason why we see lots of Ducati on the grid now. And then when FIM is changing the rule a little bit, then you are 5th or 8th, even with the best team or with the best rider on it. And this is talking about sporting fairness. For me, this is not fair because I think actually the Ducati has a butterfly opening of, I think, 84% or something like this. Give them 2 or 3% more and they will be competitive in Assen.
But
in the past, the Triumph has only 86% or something. We should ask my friend Simon Buckmaster, he could explain. And now I think they have 100%. I mean, this is a lot of difference. Maybe this is the reason why, or one of the reasons why the Triumph is now winning or competitive.
Yeah, I think the thing is, what we're having is in the balancing and the rebalancing some degree of overshoot. And I think even if the data says, oh, these guys need 3% or 5% or whatever, give them 2.5%, half the error. It's a long story. Again, in my old engineering days, when you're tuning in a new system, you say, I think we need 10% or something. Well, give it 5%. And then if what you think is going to happen improves a bit, but not enough, you give it another half of it's called halving the error. And I think that's maybe where we're doing now. Where either the people who are making the rules don't really understand enough that they're giving people back too much. Because remember, Ducati wasn't truly competitive in the first year. And then, according to everybody else, they were given too much in the second year. And all of a sudden, boom, Ducati's the dominant bike. So I think the rule balance is working, but it's overshooting and then undershooting. But it should be as close as possible all the time. But we are seeing step changes for the competitive for different bikes. But I think what's different this year, again, is the riders that are on, the lead riders on for all the manufacturers are a bit, pretty good, a step above. And part of that, remember, goes back to the fact that a lot of these guys are ex-Moto2 guys who, for no real fault of their own, just couldn't get a ride in Moto2 anymore.
I think as well, when you take Ducati, for instance, Philip Bartle having his injury, missing the opening round, coming in now in Portimao, we didn't really get to see that much from him. Jaume Masia was top 6, top 7 all the way through as a rookie this week. Schroeder had a few issues. There's a lot of circumstances in the Supersport class. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Just one quick note as well. Luca Maia's front row for both rounds so far this season. 2 4th-place finishes at the weekend. I was speaking to Ollie Rushby from Yamaha, and Ollie said that Luca has said that this bike is replacing the bike that he loved, the R6, but it's the bike that he needs to save his career. And I think it's a really good point from Luca that he's able to take himself and look at it with that assessment. And great job at the weekend from him again. Just to finish up as well, the Supersport 300 season started, and we've got 5 minutes, Evo, before you've got to go to your next call. But how are you going to remember the 300s now that we're into the final season of the class? Obviously, we've had Huertas and Gonzalez moving over to Moto2. Baton Safoglu's on a super bike. Luca Bernardi stepped through the classes and done a good job. 300s is much derided over the years, but it's actually done a pretty good job for being able to find some of those talents that maybe had gone on a little bit of a wayward step.
I mean, the racing was over the years was always outstanding. There is no other class in the world where you have so close racing like in the Supersports 300. But this is also part of the problem that sometimes not the best rider or the fastest rider is winning the race. It's maybe the more clever rider or the guy who is just who has the right toe in the last lap or whatever. And honestly, we all thought it will be a similar system like in MotoGP, where Moto3 is producing the riders for Moto2 and Moto2 produce it for MotoGP. And this is not really the case. We didn't see many really good riders coming from the 300 class to the Super Sport class, only the ones you mentioned, honestly. But I mean, over the years, we are talking about 5 riders, and we had the championship since 17, I think.
Yeah.
I agree with Evo completely. I think there have been riders that have come through from 300, and that's good. And we need to have our junior class producing riders. We can't just rely on every ex-Moto2, Moto3 rider that can't get a ride to come over and take it. We need to grow. We need to have a strong backbone of our own riders coming through as well, because that's how they're going to learn. If they're going to learn from fighting against riders that have come with a lot more experience from outside. But they need to have a class where they can prove we can see who the best ones are week on week. And it also has to be less of a jump. I think that's the biggest technical problem for the class is 300 to Supersport was an awfully big jump. And a lot of riders didn't make, even Jeffrey Buss, who was a champion and just didn't really have a great time in Supersport. So we need to, I think Evo's right, it hasn't produced the number of people that we expected it to. It's produced some amazing talents, but we're much better having faster bikes. And it all goes back to an argument I had with Loris Baz when this whole thing was there. I said, 300s, let's give it a chance and so on. And Loris, being a clever big boy in many ways, said the bikes aren't fast enough for the young rider to show that he's better than the other person. You need the bikes to be faster. You need to be able to use the throttle more, etc. And I think Loris was proved to be correct. However, we couldn't carry on just running the way we were with all the classes being the same. But I think 300 was too small a step down, and it wasn't a key to fight our way into Asia, to guarantee have 3 or 4 races in Asia, because small capacity bikes sell more in Asia. That hasn't happened. We've never had any races with the 300s in Asia, even when we went there. So that wasn't as advertised when we first started. It was a way into Asia, and it never happened.
Yeah, and this is the reason why we are making now the jump to the new sport bike class, where we will see bikes from, let's say, 450cc to nearly 700cc with plus minus 95 horsepower. I think these are proper bikes to have good racing, and second, these are very important bikes for the market, because guys like Steven and me, we would buy such bikes. Gordon is probably going for big enduro or Harley Davidson.
What? No. I've ridden my last Harley Davidson. Thanks very much. No offense. It's just not my bike.
No, the sport bike. I think this is a good idea, and there is a massive interest from lots of manufacturers. Actually, 11 manufacturers asked for the future rules. Realistically speaking, I think we will see 6 manufacturers in the first year. If we have 6 manufacturers with some proper support, this means half of the grid will have some good support from a manufacturer. So this is good for the championship, good for the riders, good for us.
For me, in the last year into the 300 class, just to move it back again, there's a couple of riders worth keeping an eye on. Carter Thompson's shown himself that.
Sure.
He's a rider. Obviously, he's doing Red Bull rookies as well. For me, 300s is obviously a place where you've got a lot of riders that aren't at the level to be world championship riders, have been in that class over the years. And when you look at some of the kids that come through, whether it was Gonzalez or Huertas are the best examples of it, not because they were the most successful riders, but because they just didn't have the money to do all the other championships. They did European Talent Cup and couldn't go to Moto 3. So they had to find a roundabout way to go World Championship racing and show their speed. And they've been able to make a career out of it. Thompson looks like he should be able to do that as well. It's hard to raise the money to do a junior GP season. This is a way to be a World Championship rider, make people take notice of you, and still do your Rookies Cup. I thought what we saw at the weekend, obviously, Bennett Fernandez, really impressive to win that race. But what was interesting for me was Julio Garcia, Fernandez, they're 17, 18 years of age. They spent pretty much the entirety of both races inside the top 5, which showed to me that they're fast, they're brave, but they're smart. Someone like Jeffrey Bowes is an interesting rider because Jeffrey's won 2 championships, but Jeffrey showed whenever he was on a Supersport bike that he couldn't adapt to it. He had a year on the bike, he did a year in the IDM championship as well on it, and he just wasn't a good Supersport rider. So for Jeffrey, his career will begin and end in the 300s unless the sports bike class gives him that platform to be able to step on again. But it'll be interesting to see how the year progresses for the 300s, just to see what those kind of riders do. There's 3 riders that I'll be keeping an eye on for it, and we'll see how the season progresses for them. But Ivo, just before we finish up, the WCR has had their testing as well in Cremona ahead of the season opener. And when you look into the second season for this, Maria Herrera is going to stay on. Obviously, Ana Carrasco's moved on to the Supersport class. Is there anything to stop Maria from being able to dominate the class this year?
I think that a couple of girls will be much closer to her. Honestly, I think the strength in depth will be clearly higher than last year, because in the end they replaced some of the slower ladies against girls who have proven that they can be fast in wildcard races, for example. So no, I think that the racing was already in the first season was good, but we had 3 groups, leading, middle, behind. I think it will be move more together and with smaller differences.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I think that what we saw last year was progression from riders in that third group to join the second group, from the second group to move forward. And I was really excited last year by Sarah Sanchez. She was really impressive. Beatrice Neela, we'll see what she can do this year into her second season in the class. But Gordo, we've got, a week before we head off to Aston as well, 5 days before we're all heading down to the next round. The season's always quite strange for World Superbikes because we've got that big gap at the start of the year from Australia to round 2. But now we go Portimao, Assen, 2 rounds in May as well with Cremona and Cremona and Most. And it really starts to build that momentum thick and fast.
Yeah, it's considering we've only got 12 rounds and 12 months in a year and we start so early, it's always going to be a bit of an odd one. But yeah, this feels much more like a regular European season for World Superbike. I'm just looking at my wall planner here. And yeah, that's great. I mean, and look at where we're going. One big historic track, one very small new track that didn't even host races for the Italian Championship, the second track in Czech Republic, but we've made it our own now, and it's actually a really interesting track. Yeah, we're developing our own character separate to MotoGP now. Again, which is what we should have, because it makes ours at least an alternative instead of just being down, MotoGP here and us down here. The further we go away in our characteristics and ideas and slight madness, the better for me, the better for us.
Yeah. Well, just for us on the Paddock Pass podcast, we've got plenty to look forward to as well. Patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. On Thursday, we've got a few riders that are due to join us. We've asked for Toprak, we've asked for Bulega, and we'll try and get them to sit down and have a little chat about what they thought about the Portimao round. We're going to have lots of other content. Gordo and David have their Pirelli discussion as well. So that'll be coming soon. And lots of other content there. So check out all of our Patreon coverage. In addition to that, for all of our patrons as well, we've got a couple of competitions coming up. We're going to have 3 pairs of tickets to give away to the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. We've got some copies of Adam's book as well to give away. And we've also got, for the Dutch TT at Assen, we're going to have a pair of paddock passes just to get you into the MotoGP paddock as well. So that'll be our next competition that we're running. So keep an eye on your feeds for all the information on that. And as ever, keep your eyes on speedweek.com, Evo, for all the news across MotoGP and World Superbikes.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure as always.
And Gordo, Evo gave us 55 minutes. We've taken 56 minutes of his time. So we'll see you in Aston as well, Gordo.
Yes, mate. Cheers, over and out. Bye. Thanks, Evo.
And as ever, big thank you to everyone for listening and supporting the podcast, especially Renthal Street and Pole Position Travel. Check out polepositiontravel.com for their packages for MotoGP, World Superbike, and the Isle of Man TT Week.